On behalf of Randstad, I am delighted to invite you here this morning to greet you here for our first Women Powering Business Forum here in the U.S.
If you have a passion for something, it's much easier to be successful.
Those businesses that have women on board are outperformed on the bottom line.
Men and women bring different qualities to leadership, and that's why a blend is best. I'm pulling support from, and I'm not going to trade on it.
So I think women are often faced with choices that are really impossible choices, and that's not true. Marilyn, my next question, I'll start with you. So, very famous, much talked about article in the Atlantic magazine, Why Women Still Can't Have It All. Mm-hmm. So in that, Anne-Marie Slaughter says we should stop fooling ourselves, that work-life balance is a myth. She characterizes the cliched formulas for success frequently used. I put career first, this kind of thing, kind of poo-poos all of that and says we really need to face the reality that that's a myth and that's not happening and we can't have it all. What are your thoughts on this? Can we have it all?
Well, it seems like that's the raging debate, and I think that balance is in the eye of the beholder. So it's self-defined based on what your expectations are. And I look at balance, at least in my own life, is not day to day. If I consider every relationship I have and every responsibility that I have, on any given day, you're not going to find balance in my life if the expectation is I'm being equal part mother, I'm being equal part daughter, I'm being equal part employee, et cetera, et cetera. So I tend to look at things as seasons. In one quarter, I may hunker down because I've got some major initiatives at work that I need to get accomplished. Another quarter, I'm going to say, you know what, I'm a community servant, and so these are the initiatives that I'm undertaking this quarter. Another quarter, it's going to be, you know, my kids are getting ready to go off to college, and I want to be present for that. So, and I don't want to have anybody walk out the room and say it's got to be quarter by quarter, but I think you get the drift that it's really relative to seasons, and I think the whole debate around this balance comes in when we start talking about caregiving. And you don't see this debate until that element gets introduced into the conversation. But I think in fairness to even men, if in their definition of balance, it was to include being primarily responsible for caregiving, you wouldn't hear any men saying that they felt like they had the traditional sense of balance as well. So I've just been lucky when I hear about all the women speaking, whether it's mentorship or sponsorship. I've been blessed to have both. I've been blessed to have a husband who always believed that he carried the responsibility for 50% of the domestic obligations in life. And so I really am concerned about people feeling like they have to define balance based on anybody else's definition. I think it's got to be what works for you. You still have to be able to get the job done. You still have to be able to produce good results, but you have to find a way that creates that balance for yourself. And in my own personal opinion, anytime you start seeing people gravitate to the extremes, that's when we get locked into this hyperbole and discussion that at the end of the day doesn't become overly productive for anyone. But we do need, you know, women can't be that which they can't see. I think Pamela talked about it. It's kind of like acting acting until you can become thinking in a different way. And when you look at why there aren't more women in the executive roles, you can't be that which you can't see. And if people, to Pat's point, are not aspiring to be in those positions because they perhaps perceive that the sacrifices that have been made are more than they want to make, that's when they start opting out. And one of the things that's been gratifying for me is we have a research institute that a lot of people don't know about. We've actually studied at what point in life do girls' and boys' perspective of leadership begin to diverge. Because early on, up until about the age of 10, they're the same. At the age of 11, you begin to hear boys define leadership in terms of being the boss, making more money, and having power. If you ask girls at that same age, much of their definition of leadership is going to be around sharing skills, helping develop people, change management for the greater good, and it's much more altruistic in terms of how they define leadership. So we have all of that going on, and then just trying to make it ourselves in a world that's not always conducive.
Absolutely, fantastic. Pat, work-life balance, is it a myth? Can we have it all?
I think that the idea of that we can manage it in balance is a myth. I mean, that whole image that it's always going to be even is a myth. Because, and when we tell our daughters and the young women that are coming after us that you can get it like this, we are perpetuating a myth. Because, as Marilyn said, there are some days when things are up and things are down. You know, my dad suffered with a real challenging illness over the last year, and there were days I had to be daughter first, mother last, executive second somewhere in there, and then somewhere fill in the community responsibilities. So I think of it as navigating work and life and all of the other responsibilities. And yes, you can do it all, do all you choose to do. You have to be highly scheduled and organized, but you have to be able to navigate around the potholes. You know, in the middle of a conference call, or coming to this meeting and being told you have this conference call at 7, you've got to be able to navigate around those potholes to continue to fulfill your obligations. And we have to acknowledge that it is hard, right? We have to stop making it look easy. Let's acknowledge the fact that it's hard. I mean, how many times when my son was young, he's 21 now, that we were in New York at the time, that I had to commute an extra hour to drop him at my sister-in-law's, who was at home with her child, caring for mine. That's the child care of choice, was an extra hour of commute in and out. So 6 a.m. leaving the house, 8 p.m. getting home, clean him, wash him, feed him, put him to bed, and then collapse. Did that for 2 years. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. My relationship with my husband was probably the thing that had to fall to the bottom at that time. So the concept of balance, if we try to make it think like this, doesn't exist. But if we get really skilled at navigating the potholes, I think we can figure out a way to have it all.
Very interesting.
Can I just say something? Yes. I loved her article, but I did think that the title was probably not her title, which I think was Women Can't Have It All. And I actually saw her, Anne-Marie Slaughter's article, actually much more the critique of the professions in the United States, which had sort of not taken on the issue that people really do have lives where they have to care for people, whether they are parents, whether they are children, but that the professions in America, and I do see this as a failure of feminism, just went for, you know, that the solution was to make sure that women and men had equal opportunity to be lawyers, executives, etc., but didn't solve some of these really systemic problems. So what's interesting is in many of the listservs, the women's studies, feminist listservs that I belong to, people hated that article. I thought it was a lovely article. I thought it was a brave, lovely article that talked about the reality of people's lives and sort of was asking professions to step up a bit more in terms of maybe enhancing flexibility, you know, providing childcare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And just to the point of work-life balance, a doctor at Emory talks about work-life integration, which I think somehow makes it more easy to sort of think about it. And I think navigating is also the point. And what I tell my students is, I don't think you can have it all at once, but maybe over the long haul in a life you can. And so that also settles things. If you can't do it right this minute, maybe you do need to be thinking mostly about your work and your kids for a few years, and then you can start emerging. And I do think that also has to do with leadership, is that my children are now older, and I'm beginning to think I could, you know, flourish in a different way. But I couldn't imagine that 5 years ago. I was just like going to work and looking after kids. Now they're getting older, but I think men invest a lot of energy in leadership and everything at young age. They're 20s, 30s, 40s, and when they get to their 50s, they've like had their career and they're ready to kind of get all warm and cozy. And I think a lot of women who've had kids will go, okay, no, I've been there for everybody else. This is my time. So I think women, if we think about women on a different leadership track, that it just is a different timeline. I think there are opportunities for women to be leaders, but maybe not when, you know, the standard timeline, which is the male timeline.